Because once again, in the North Korean one, and this is considered a classic film.
South Korean one.
This is a South Korean film, right? A South Korean film. It's considered a classic, and it's beloved by all over the fucking world, and especially in that society, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm not going to make speculations about like, oh, this is how the society looks at this, but it's kind of telling that this film is so popular and well respected and deals with personal revenge in such a direct way, where it's not so much like moralizing, it's just looking at how each of these men go about at effectively getting revenge on one another, just for purely selfish reasons, self-centered reasons. Whereas in Spike Lee's one, it is a form of vigilantism where he has to right the wrongs before they happen to somebody else. So it's no longer just him doing this out of pure selfishness, his own self-centeredness. There's a level of heroicism that's attached to it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like displacing, so that way you don't have to feel so that way you don't have to start asking the questions of like, oh, wait a minute, is either of them in the right or wrong? Like, who's in the right or the wrong? For seeking revenge on one another.
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with those questions because it's just framed as, no, this person is just flat out the bad guy and they need to die and by any means necessary, and he's doing it, the character, he's not doing it for himself, he's doing it for his family, because it's kind of hard to tell somebody, fuck your family, don't bother trying to save them. You're never going to hear that, or you'll rarely hear that. So it's kind of, I just use that as an example. And Spike Lee's Old Boy was not popular. It's shit in many different respects. But once again, I just think it's one of those things where it reflects, of what the director, the writer, is trying to show about society, or what they even feel themselves. Which is that in America, if you're going to be justified in committing violence or whatever, it can't just be you, going out and wanting to do things for a selfish reason. You have to go there to defend your flag, to defend your country, to defend your homeland, to defend your family, and to defend, innocent people abroad and whatnot, to establish democracy, all this other bullshit.
Yeah.
So it's just, once again, just how people are massaged or kind of hinted to look at things a certain way.
Yeah. And it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. It's everywhere. It seeps in everywhere.
It's even in like our like kids cartoons and shit. Like you see the same, like, not from the same perspective as like with those old shows, like with the Just World theory, where you're trying to represent that the world is fair and we're all just getting along and everything's good and fine. But you see it in like there's good guys and there's bad guys, and there's not really much like moral gray area in children's cartoons in terms of like what's just and not just.
Yes.
And in the world, there's an immense amount of it. It's almost inescapable in most situations.
Yep. Absolutely. Excuse me, absolutely.
But we just get sold all that shit.
I mean, that, advertisements, that thing of looking at everything as a dichotomy. It has to be this or that. It's black or it's white, or, it's like, no, it's like there's degrees, there's a gradient here, and there's a spectrum or a Venn diagram, or however you want to, somebody wants to look at it.
Yeah, it's all relative.
It's all, yeah, that's right. It's all relative.
Tagged it perfectly on the hour.
That's right. I appreciate that. So, rounding out the hour, we were just talking about Afghanistan media and propaganda and whatnot, and I appreciate my guests for diving into that. And so, now to get into the next topic, it's going to play off of the same dynamic of breaking away from the dichotomy framework, or what's sometimes called the false equivalence fallacy. There's other terms for it, but basically looking at everything as being either this or it's that. And the topic I want to get into specifically is one that's a hot button issue in left-wing circles right now, mainly on like online platforms, like social media platforms. It's class reductionism and woke essentialism. And for those listening, reductionism and essentialism, they both kind of mean the same thing. Basically what they mean is just reducing things down to being a very simple, basically what I was just saying before, reducing things down, simplifying things down to a level of basicness that isn't a true reflection of the complexity of the issue.
Yeah.
So the first part is class reductionism, which is a phenomenon where left people who identify as left-wing, socialists, or have a Marxist critique of capitalism, they will say that all other forms of discrimination based on whether it's ideology or religion or cultural, personal identity, gender identity, stuff like that, all stem from economic disparity or material dialectics.
And these tend to be your white leftists.
Here's the thing I was going to get into about woke essentialism is that while there are plenty of white leftists who do fall into that, because it's an easy way to say, hey, yeah, let's fight for general change in the economy, but I don't want to have to deal with all these different cultural war, these specific identity issues. Yeah. It's a way to put them on the back burner, but still try to coax people of color along for the ride of Nazi Bolshevism. And but like with anything else, even though there's mostly white people doing this, there's plenty of non-white people that are also buying into this shit. Yeah. And then go ahead.
Well, I would just say, like, in trying to imagine what you're talking about, like, the example that I've always gone to would be, like all the Bernie Sanders stuff about healthcare for everybody, but we keep, like, stuff like the border wall racism shit. Like, that would be an acceptable future for a class reductionist, and that's an example of, like, why that's an insufficient, political understanding.
Yes, absolutely, because it just creates another layer of... It just creates it maintains a level of strict hierarchy. Yes. They don't want to, but because they confronted capitalism head on and set up a nice co-op and shit and some unions or whatever, they're like, yeah, this is enough. We did everything we need to. And then on the other side is one that gets alluded to, but a lot of the people who talk about it don't actually have a good grasp of the language and whatnot. And so, but it's woke essentialism. And the only reason I use essentialism at the end of woke instead of reductionism, I just think phonetically it sounds better. Yeah. But they both kind of said the same thing. And woke essentialism, or woke reductionism, if you will, is the same thing as class reductionism, but strictly concerning cultural and identity issues. And these are the individuals whom, they may talk about class issues or economic disparity to a certain degree, but everything for them always comes down to, oh, you're only criticizing me because I'm black, or you're only saying that because I'm transgender, or you're only doing this because, you don't like liberals, or, you don't like or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, it's sort of like complementary reductionism to class reductionism. Yes. It's like everything but class reductionism.
Yeah, exactly. They'll pay each side will pay the least amount of lip service to keep the respective groups from coming at their throats. But when you press them further, people can only hide behind their bullshit for so long before the truth starts to come out, and they just completely give the game away. Yeah. And I don't know exactly whom or why this conversation has come up again lately, because there's nothing new. I think what it is just like we just kind of reached the boiling point where people have kind of realized the threshold of wokeness, or the threshold of always prioritizing identity politics, and seeing that it's only being able to get so much done. Because really, when we talk about identity politics and stuff, this didn't really start becoming as big as it is now. So we're in the middle of 2020. The first social media platforms didn't come out until the late 2000s. So Facebook was 2007, and then Twitter and I think Reddit and whatnot, they followed a couple years later before the end of the decade. So really, we just kind of had a little over a decade of these platforms being as massive and influential as they are. Yeah. Right? And what has become huge as a result of that is all of these stories about whether it's issues happening to black people or other people of color around the world, imperialism, religious discrimination, the transgendered stories, women's stories and everything. Basically, all these marginalized, vulnerable groups have found a way to get their stories and their ideas and their values up into the mainstream. Yep. And as a result of this, of course, this creates a reactionary response in many different sectors. And so kind of my theory about what's happened is that because of how stifled these stories and these groups have been for so long, and that they've kind of just barely been able to get their stories out and whatnot, there's a tendency to over-focus and over-correct by making them the priority in every issue, or either genuinely feeling victimized or playing into victimization, and weaponizing one's identity.
Or even to use another's identity as an irrelevant canard to distract from a pressing social issue.
Yes.
Which is an even more disgusting version of the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. It is the genuine, some people just use identity politics and intersectionality as a derogatory term, as if they are bad in of themselves. So just to give quick definition, identity politics, and I want to make sure I credit the authors and whatnot, because they're great.
Yeah, Tarana Burke, right?
So there's, I don't know, well, the ones I know of are Kimberly Crenshaw and Barbara Smith. I don't know if there's some contentions on who's claiming it. These are just the most consistent sources I've seen. Tanaka Burke is the one who came up with the Me Too.
I got my people who came up with things wrong.
Yeah. So and once again, I don't know the backgrounds that deep.
Yes.
But in any case, Barbara Smith and Kimberly Crenshaw, these are both black women. They identify as feminists, but also Marxists. And Barbara Smith came up with the term identity politics. And when she said this, she was quoted as saying that we as black women, we actually have a right to create political priorities and agendas and actions and solutions based on our experiences in having these simultaneous identities that included other identities via the working class, being LGBT, and of course being black in general.
Yeah.
And then you have the term intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw, which she described as she says that it's not identity politics on steroids. It's not a mechanism to turn white men into the new pariahs of society. It's basically a lens, a prism for which you see the world with various forms of inequality, often operating together and exacerbating each other. When we talk about race inequality as separate inequality based on, she says that we tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. What's often missing is how some people are subject to all of these, and the experience is not just the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
So, we've all used these terms. They become very popular, and as a result, they get misused. They get appropriated by bad faith parties or just ignorant parties who operate with a limited understanding. But really, these ideas, these words, concepts, were really to help all people. They just happen to come from black women in the United States who loved Marxism, but also loved being black, and also, saw feminism and thought that there must be a way of looking at all these different intersecting identities and experiences, and that this naturally will affect the priorities which you seek in society, which includes political action. And so to get back to the woke essentialism and the class reductionism, what's happened, unfortunately, is you have definitely had these people whom have co-opted wokeness, as they like to say, which is just a pejorative for those whom care about social progressiveness and are concerned with identity politics and intersectionality. It's meant to be an insult.
I would say particularly those who are concerned with using them in a disingenuous fashion and using the issues of other people.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I just remembered what's kind of like brought this back into the fore. There was a recent video, and I don't know about the source too much. I think they were just like a stand-up comedian, which is, for people who don't know, it's like stand-up. The world of stand-up is very reactionary. Yeah, they make a lot of them
saying things there.
Yeah, they're you could look at the stand-up comedy scene as being like a right-wing libertarian space. Yeah, they'll push against like society and shit when they tell them they can't say things that they want, but like, other things like being supportive of the police and the military, or being, lower taxes, or, even just voting for Republicans, being Republican supporters, is nothing new or rare within that particular subculture. But there was a video a comedy sketch, as they call it, as they said, where two white guys have shirts on. One of them says racist, one of them says woke. And the topic of the video, or the title of the video, is the one thing that wokies and racists all agree on. And basically the joke is that they both say that, race is the most important factor of a person's identity, because, racists, obviously that's, they're racial bigots and whatnot, but then the joke is also that woke people are all essentialists, that they all boil people down to this one identity. Now, this dude, I doubt that he's as politically savvy, you know what I'm saying, or was operating with this context. It was just a very
You don't think that he happened on that critique purposefully?
No, I don't think he was coming from the he shot a lot deeper than he intended to, than he thought he would. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, it's like when people accidentally come up with deep social commentaries, like the woman holding an American flag that peels back to be a Confederate flag, and it's painted onto a flag, and it's like, wow, you didn't realize what you were doing there, did you? No, you didn't. You just became a satire of yourself, you fucking moron.
Yep, and
Good job.
Oh God, and that's something else. If we remember it, we could go into in how satire and parody is misused by the right because it takes a certain amount of emotional and it takes a certain amount of emotional and just general historical intelligence to actually pull off like satire and parody, depending on how deep you go. Oh, because there was also another example of this dude. I think he was a cop, and he had a Confederate statue or whatever on a tattoo, I think, on his calf. And so he was like, oh, I've been getting stares. I thought it was best to get this covered up. And he got it covered up with a Blue Lives Matter tattoo. So same fucking thing. Same fucking thing. But anyway.
You wouldn't say they were the same thing. Because he's engaging in identity politics.
Oh, my God. Yes. And actually, that's a good – and you know what? That's so great because to go back to get – to stay on that track of woke essentialism and class reductionism, what both parties are doing – is the same. What both groups are doing are the same thing. And it is an issue. I'm not going to say like, oh, which one is a bigger one, more pressing. The fact is that they are both improper analysis to our society and how to solve these myriad of issues. And the thing that's actually really frustrating and why I kind of harp more on the class reductionist thing, people have been talking about class and money, basically money, material-based disparities and shit in a much more mainstream fashion for longer in society than identity politics issues. Identity politics issues are relatively new compared to, like intersectional and identity politics critiques of society and media and politics and everything are a lot more new and novel than critiques of capitalism and economic situations.
I think that like critiques of capitalism and of things on class issues, like one of the reasons that there's a kerfuffle about all this is that class analysis has been driven from the public understanding, or when it is represented to the public, it's represented as something like the white working class, which is like sort of anathema because the working class is not predominantly white.
Mm-hmm.
Like.
Correct. Yeah, they don't tell you that part. That's the bit of information that they like to leave out because then they got to answer, because then they got to be like, well, then why are there so many more white people that are like representing professionals and CEOs and bank, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. They want to answer that question.
Yeah, they're not interested in representing, like we were saying, like a good faith debate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you get people's like genuine concerns, like, misused and abused, and you get people coming up with fake concerns to rile people up and split them like in a factionalist manner, like the same way that like guns and abortion are used to split mainstream Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
Like that's what it is. It's like that for the woke left. But like, what are they going to do? Are they going to break up their voting bloc? Probably not. Those people are all probably going to vote pretty similar the same way, but they might be able to frustrate them politically, which certainly is a goal.
Right, exactly. And here's like the the thing with that is that obviously there's always going to be a mixture of internal and external forces that are using this in a bad faith way, and it's happening it's happening on the liberal side, it's also happening on the conservative right wing side. And for those listening, we also make a clear distinction between people who are liberals and lefties. Yeah,
very, very different things.
Very different things. And while there may be, more overlap between us, obviously than like centrists or like, right-wingers and whatnot, there's plenty of criticisms that left-wingers have of liberals because we feel that they don't go far enough in their critiques and willingness to challenge the system, the status quo, because oftentimes they're the ones whom feel very comfortable where they're at in the status quo.
And are not, therefore, effective political allies, as in the words of Martin King, they prefer, order over justice.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, yes, right. So they're not good.
Yeah.
Not good
They're
allies.
not good allies. They're not good at politics. I don't know.
Well,
we just kind of barely tolerate them.
Well, they're good at they have a certain level of effectiveness. Otherwise, they would just always get run over by the conservatives. But they tend to save that for left wingers.
Yeah.
They'll and you can definitely see this once again in how they treated
Bernie.
And the way that they did Bernie twice. You know, I think that kind of speaks for itself. But to stick back to the issues of these very polarized ways of looking at it, that there are external forces, liberals and right wingers, conservatives, whatever, that are using it in a disingenuous way, and then there are genuinely incidents of this shit that happen amongst the populace, just from because somebody says that, like, oh, I believe in this, or I think this thing is fucked up, doesn't mean that they have an adequate understanding of their own identity or information to assess the issue. So to just give a couple of quick examples. Like when a woke essentialism, when that occurs, that'll be a situation where there was a thing with Matt Damon. He went to go sit with a bunch of other producers, and they were talking about issues of identity and whatnot in film and whatnot, right? And one of the people that he was having a back and forth with was a black woman. And I don't know if she was a writer or director or whatnot. They were talking about it, right? And in the video, it is made to look as if Matt Damon just completely blows off her comments and tries to steamroll the conversation. Yeah. But then when you go and you actually watch, and she acts, and the thing is, even within that thing, she still acts offended and acts like he doesn't take her answer seriously. Now, when you see the full uncut edit of the video, you realize that she was the one that was actually trying to interrupt Matt Damon and steamroll it and get him to stop trying to make his point. The editing of the video, and whoever did that was helping to promote that shit, And then you have on the class reductionist side, I'm trying to think of like something that's similar to the one I just said about like Matt Damon. If you have one, please share it.
Well, I haven't started trying to think about one, so I'll try to think about one now. We can both try and think about one.
Okay. Well, you know what? Because I'll put it like this: class reductionism. So I had a back and forth with somebody, and I think I shared that exchange with you. Or you saw it. I had an exchange with somebody talking about class reductionism, and one of their sticking points for some reason was that even though there's somebody who identifies as left wing and identifies as I don't know if it's just strictly socialist or Marxist, but they have a very strong anti-capitalist critique, right?
Yeah.
Their contention that it's making people compete with one another over identity, and it's creating a sense of being replaced. Now, he didn't say that this was his view. He said that this is what he said. He said that this is the fear-mongering bullshit used by right-wingers to justify their misappropriation of it. So I was like, and my whole point of contention to him was, I was like, well, wait a minute. If this isn't what you believe and you aren't concerned about this, why do you keep relying on their misappropriation and their bad faith arguments to justify this shit? You should just push back on that with a good faith argument for identity politics and intersectionality.
Yeah.
But for some reason you don't really care, and the reason, and I didn't dig too deep into that part, but the implication is being that since he kept running back to that and didn't provide any other explanation for saying that, like, oh, this is going to divide up people and not allow them to have solidarity, is they probably feel that and this is a white person, a white passing man.
I'm shocked to find this out.
All right, he's a white passing man, and but I think he comes from like Latin, a working class like Latin roots. But in any case, there's a white
racism is intersectional too.
Well, of course, absolutely, you're absolutely right.
Yes,
but this white passing man, he seemed to be concerned with the issue of basically the replacement. That like, and that somehow talking about identity politics to almost any degree for him, runs the risk of it replacing a greater socialist critique. Yeah, it's this overly simplistic. It's wanting to look at the world in very, what was that example you used? The just world fallacy?
Yeah, the just world hypothesis theory fallacy. It's all of those.
Yeah, it's basically just wanting to reduce other people and other people's and other interests and whatnot and other ideas to being more simplistic than they actually are, so that way you can dismiss them and curry favor amongst those whom happen to agree with you.
Yeah.
You
Because,
know,
like, there are, many very valid facets of the politics of identity in the United States, but we have all of these prominent displays of people bastardizing them intentionally for propaganda value. There was a joke that I made to one of my, I don't remember who exactly, but it was like that, like with Joanne Reed, they kept finding her calling people like homophobic names on blog posts and shit. Oh yeah, all that. And I joked that she has always deep down just been a problematic older white man, and that she should come out now as transracial, and that would put all of this to bed.
That's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, you see so many people peddling this shit, and they're just obvious grifters. And you wanna just like yell at them. You wanna be like, fucking stop it! You're not even good at this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the scary thing, is that like you really see the start. You really see just how much it is about performance and theater and towing and saying and repeating a certain script, as opposed to maintaining any sort of moral consistency, philosophical consistency. Because people, it's like, there's plenty of talk about how inconsistent like fascists are, or in general conservative ideology, because so much of it is just based off of, bigotry.
Yeah. Or reacting to keep power.
Or reacting to keep power, which makes you, go in contradictory ways. But there's also plenty of contradictory shit amongst, liberals. And Joanne Reed is definitely somebody who we peg as a liberal. But let's to tie in with the class reduction and woke essentialism.
I think I have a good example for you.
Of what?
The disingenuous class essentialist and wokist critiques that were applied to the Bernard.
Ah, okay, go ahead.
Yes. He's a sexist. Why is he a sexist? Well, he said he didn't think a woman could win in a strategy meeting in private with Elizabeth Warren without anyone around and no media. All right, well, he's an elitist. Well, why is he an elitist? Well, he's got 3 houses. Well, who are you working for? Mike Bloomberg. Well, how many houses does Mike Bloomberg have? 7. And they're bigger. They're a lot bigger.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, no, those are really 2 great examples. Great examples of that. They tried to hit any angle that they could to bring him down.
Yeah, both coming out of the mouth of Joy Reid, too.
Yeah, and once again, this just underscores how irrational their shit is, because how do you go from woke essentialist to class reductionist about talking about the same person? It's one thing to attack different people about it, but then you attack the same person. It's like, how is this person these completely polar opposites, unless you don't actually really believe in this shit, or you're just willing to say whatever the fuck to keep those checks coming in.
It might be both of those.
It's the thing is, it's all of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above. But no, but those are perfect examples, and I love that you brought that up.
And it's also something that's like very like something that everyone can relate to, and that isn't like a lesser known political story. It's like very, very, very obvious to everyone who was like even like a sock dem in the last like 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to do well to remember that when I bring it up again, because I'm actually thinking about doing a video essay specifically on this issue, because I feel like it's going to be a huge wedge going forward, just because it seems to have like kind of popped up in the discourse out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Again.
You got to do sad piano music and 0.75% speed, Joanne Reid being a reactionary. That'll be like half of the essay.
Only half? I was thinking 3/4.
I'm sure you could get a whole dissertation out of her.
Hell yeah, yeah. But that's basically for folks listening, class reductionism, woke essentialism. It's really just taking these very basic frameworks for looking at society, whatever the motivation may be, whether it's a personal fear of being quote unquote replaced by other competing interests or identity groups. Which I don't know why that's like, I don't think that's a genuine fear. It's
just classic white nationalist, white supremacist propaganda. It's like their oldest joke.
Right, but here's the thing in which we get into like intersectionality in a negative fashion, in that there is still plenty of intersecting bigotry within vulnerable groups. So I'm a black man, and there was a huge fucking and there's been a history of anti-Semitism within the black community. And one of the events that kind of rehashed this situation is Nick Cannon's statements that he made on some podcast. I don't know how long ago the podcast was, but they were.
Then they skewered him.
And then they skewered him. So for those that haven't known or didn't keep up with it, basically Nick Cannon was on some podcast, and there was it was whatever, the audio for some reason resurfaced, that he basically made some comments basically playing into anti-Semitic tropes about Jews controlling the media and having a consolidation on wealth and the banks and stuff like that. Very ugly anti-Semitic tropes. And then at the very end, he made comments about white people, saying that they are just, because they lack melanin, they are just naturally more barbaric and monstrous, and that's why they have to go out, and that's why they've gone out and committed wars and did shit. Which it's like, yeah, it's on one end it's funny and hilarious because of how hyperbolic it is, but on the other side,
uneducated Nick Cannon is about politics and history.
And history, exactly. You laugh on that part, but then on the other part is that for those whom don't have the same context of understanding that we do, there's plenty of black people whom. So Nick Cannon made these grotesque comments, right? And they were straight up anti-Semitic, which is a form of racism. And the comments that he made about white people are also racist. Racism happens at a institutional and a personal level.
Well, I mean, my view on this is that, I think, Nick Cannon certainly, said some dumb things, but, he's not a historian. He's not a political commentator. He's not a politician. He's a media personality. Yeah. And, if he had someone with an academic background on the things that he was talking about on him, he probably wouldn't have gotten his ass into trouble, but he's kind of an idiot, in this regard.
I mean, I hear you, and that's a valid, thing to point out, is that he is just a media figure. He's just been in media and entertainment since he was a kid. And he is not always, and the thing is, most of his aesthetic has been not being taken too seriously. He was always kind of seen as a cornball until the last 10 or 12 years or so. And the reason why I'm not so forgiving of this shit, as somebody whom, wants to try to move up through media and entertainment, is that you are taught, if you're somebody that wants to get into journalism or politics or just to be taken seriously, that if you're not sure of something, don't speak on it, or at least voice that, or at least make that clear, that you're operating with a limited set of understanding about an issue before you say things. When you go out and you just say things declaratively without any caveats, without any nuances, to me it's hard. It's hard for me to sympathize with that, especially when you go out and you say really ignorant things and really hurtful things. Because, as I said, I genuinely look at that stuff as being, I definitely believe that people can be racist against white people.
I just don't think it really has any, palpable effect. You could stand out there and hate white people till the cows come home, but, what does that do?
Once again, it's not all. Once again, here's the thing: is that there's institutional and then there's personal, racism, and there's overlap and then there's contrast, where they exist. That's why you can have a situation where Beyonce, can be this icon of black femininity in the U.S., but still be operating in the same capitalist fashion of having sweatshops and exploiting people who belong to the global South. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Even as she belongs to a marginalized group within the global North. And then of course you have the situations in any different country where a group of people, will sell, to go back to the Venezuela example, Guaido, who is a Venezuelan, who was willing to sell out his fellow Venezuelans and their oil industry and various other facets of the society to foreign interests because they were more ideologically aligned with him than the Maduro and the other reigning figures there, right? So there's once again it's like you said, it's intersecting, and so the reason why I genuinely say that you can experience racism as a white person, even if you're a white privileged person, because it can happen to you. Somebody could come to you and say "fuck you, cracker," and not know you or whatever, and spit in your face or throw pee in your face or whatever the fuck. And I think that still has an effect on you. That still fucks with you, and that is an incident of race based bigotry. Of
Well,
course.
I would definitely say that that's racial antagonism, but like the thing that like to me qualifies racism is like you were saying that the structural pattern of it, the fact that like say that happens to me, that that could totally reasonably happen to me, but like that's not going to happen to me like that many times in my life. Like regardless, like you would have to work hard to come up with circumstances that would replicate that a lot. Like
Well, no,
like
because
there's definitely like some like respects of like society, especially in something like the South. Like if I'm a white guy, I can't get my hair cut like most of Little Rock. Like that's just like that to me is a representation of like like the parts of society that I'm not party to is like who I am. But like to me, like then you sort of just end up by talking about like the definition of racism, whether or not you take like a more common definition, like the one you're advancing right now, which is like whether or not like someone holds like bigoted views against someone. But like I would say that the more academic definition, or the one that like a lot of people would tend to favor, would be like the fact that it like you can't just have like the discriminatory belief, but it has to have like a power structure behind it, and preferably like a strong, influential societal power structure behind it. So I would say that like absolutely like racial antagonism, like it could even provoke like let's take the example further. Like so white guy gets his face spit in, he becomes a racist, right? Like that could happen.
No. Well, I'm not. That wasn't the point I was. That wasn't what I was like trying to lead into. I wasn't saying that like, oh, this radicalizes them. I was just talking about the act itself. And so to talk about like what you like you said, the definition is that to me it isn't just about, because we all hold same views that could be seen as problematic or bigoted or whatever. But in that case, that had a palpable effect on that person. It's not a matter of like, oh, were they denied a home loan? And I'm not equivocating the damage that of wealth disparity based along racial lines is the same as this incident. But to me, every degree of it needs to be attached, because like whether it's a physical personal attack or whether it's something systemic, saying through all these different apparatuses and whatnot, it's like I don't, to me, I don't like any of that stuff. And the thing is, and just from me coming up and growing up, as being, because the thing is, there's also access to whiteness that you are denied from. You know what I'm saying? There are aspects of whiteness that you are seen counter to or not, welcome into, because you don't check off the right boxes for other gatekeepers of whiteness. So it's like once again, there's levels within these levels, because I am not considered, something I've heard commonly growing up by other black people, even members of my own family, is that the way that you talk or the way that you carry yourself, the way that you dress, blah, 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 you're not black, or so-and-so is more black, blah, blah, blah. There's this constant, and while there may be external, influences of stuff on that, at the same time, this is just how people are. People gatekeep around identity in all sorts of different stupid fucking ways. And, there's plenty of black on black racism. There's plenty of racism between blacks and whites and browns and shit like that. Because when you have people, once again, kind of like essentializing them or reducing them and saying that, oh, because you're this is what you have access to, or I already know your life is going well and whatnot. So it's okay if you get fucked with in this respect because it isn't institutional. And that's kind of like, going back to like the woke essentialism thing, that's kind of like an issue that I take, with like, what you call it? There was a show called, Dear White People.
Oh, I haven't watched that. Should I watch that? Is it worth watching?
Yeah, nah, because to me it's just woke essentialism. To me it's just an overcorrection. But one of the pivotal moments in there is in the beginning, where it happens on a campus. It's mostly black kids or whatever, right? And so this young black woman who is like a woke essentialist, she goes up to like the dean or some other black male figure who's considered in this framework. He basically kind of has the position that I have. Where he's not like with his hair on fire, like, oh my God, look what you're doing to white people, but just like, hey, don't you see that you're also just kind of using a very like simplified way of looking at race to talk about white people and talk about these issues and don't you think that's being racist? And she basically gives the definition of like the more common one that's accepted, which is, no, it's all about institutional. She said that no, black people can be bigoted, but they can't be racist because there's the implication of institutional stuff. But to me, it's like, I don't even feel like I'm operating with a contradiction of their definition. I'm just highlighting different degrees of impact. So like a rich white privileged person, maybe they can mostly only be affected by personal incidents of racism as opposed to like personal and structural. But to me, that is still a discussion worth having, or that's something still worth tackling and addressing.
Yeah, there's always room for more nuance and cultural discussions of pretty much everything.
Right, exactly. And so it's like, to get back into the example of like bigotry within marginalized groups, is that even as a black person, I'm still a black man. And in many situations, I will have priority over a black woman, or at least be taken more seriously, because on top of the racism of blackness, there's the misogyny towards women.
Yeah. Right?
And then, of course, there's also the issue of homophobia and transphobia, which is huge in general, but especially within the black community in the United States, various immigrant communities, and whatnot.
Communities with a culturally conservative background that tend to cling to it.
Well, that's the funny thing, though, is that you got to remember, even up until like Obama's first term and whatnot, he did not approve of gay marriage.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that sentiment, and Joanne Reed, was also like, that was when she made like her
dropping F-bombs on people.
dropping F-bombs and stuff. So it's like, once again, it just kind of shows how people can be really good on issues. They have their own pet issues, which they may be really, really good on.
Yeah.
And then they have these other set of issues in which they are just as reactionary as the opposition, the people that they're supposed to be opposed to. So I was just bringing that up to be mindful of the fact that, like, intersectionality, as you said, racism and all this other bigotry and stuff, it happens at different levels. It can happen, crisscrossing and whatnot, in groups, out groups, and my own point is that, like, we just have to be vigilant
even
about
within groups.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. In groups and out.
Like colorist, discrimination within the black community or something.
And not even just the black community, any community.
Like all of the communities.
Or hell, even you can even talk about, like, as a matter of fact, let's go into whiteness a little bit more.
Sure.
Because whiteness is a fairly recent phenomenon.
Oh yeah, whiteness is it's a big mess.
As people may understand about, like, the founding of the United States, these were European peoples. And European peoples, if you meet a German, they're going to tell you they German. If you meet an Italian, they're going to tell you they Italian. If you meet a Norwegian, they will fucking tell you. Yeah. They're not going to be like, I'm a European. This identity, this whole amalgamation of whiteness was something that was specifically cultivated for centuries. In the United States.
With a specific political goal.
With a specific political goal, because for those that don't know, you may know about eugenics, which is basically a pseudoscience that tries to look at genetic or cultural dispositions that a group of people may have, which there's no... I
could give you the full lecture on that shit. I hate that shit so much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so folks may be familiar with that. What they may not know is that before it was used on non-white people or non-European people, it was used on Eastern Europeans. Because Western Europeans, and this is actually a thing that exists to this day, they see themselves as superior even to Eastern Europeans.
Yep.
And once again, it's a schism that exists to this day, which is why you may see depictions online of people from, like, the Czech Republic or from Slovenia or the Balkan areas and whatnot. They are typically basically depicted as, like, inept, uneducated, uncultured.
By like the British and people like that, and the French and the Spaniards and the Germans and my family is actually Czech.
Say that again.
My family is Czech.
Yeah. So exactly. So y'all would be in the United States. For those that don't know any better, it's like, oh, you're just a white guy. But if they know you and they see you and they can peg you in France or England or fucking Germany or something, you better hope you're in good company.
They won't say nothing to me. I'd slap the shit out of them. I'm fucking huge.
Well, you're just one dude. They got big motherfuckers there too.
Yeah.
But in any case.
White... but like there's that gradient of like whiteness within, like, groups of Europeans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And that got carried over as they began to colonize the world. They had to say, oh shit, if we're going to conquer all these different people, especially since a lot of them outnumber us, we need to. What's the most effective way for getting everybody on the same board? Is that you get them to say, oh, we're all Europeans. Yeah, they're a Prussian. Yeah, that's a Czech. Czech. They're Czech. Or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever the fuck, but we are all Europeans, right?
Yeah.
And
we just recently stopped enslaving the Czechs.
Really? Oh my God.
the Slavs. Well, I'm talking about Europe in the time period in which whiteness was developed. Yeah, like there were before the slaves were taken from the what is it? All the Atlantic islands and from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were. One of the reasons that they started getting a lot of African slaves is that they would send a lot of the European slaves to work in the colonies, and the European slaves, they would die. And if they used like slaves from like the area they were trying to like have the colony in, like they had like I don't know, like a higher resistance to malaria or something. So like, you get a lot more out of your slaves if you bought.
Yeah.
That's such a horrible statement, but it's totally accurate. It's like it refers to their like thinking and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But like when the enslavement of Africa and South America was in full swing, there were these largely French, but like very broadly in European, these like theorists of race who came up with before we even got to eugenics, we had this lovely other pseudoscience about race called phrenology.
Yeah.
Oh my God, which is even fucking goofier.
Oh yeah.
They had these depictions, like they would have a drawing of like in the propaganda that was produced by phrenologists. They would say each part of the brain is underneath the skull, and the size of the area where that part is contributes to some part of your personality. All of this is, of course, not borne out scientifically at all, but in discussing the theory, and that they would then take these drawings of like an African man and a European man. They would show the African man, and the back of his head would be elongated, like almost to the point where like it would be like from the movie Alien. Like, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like it was very drawn like non-anatomically. Yeah. And they were like, oh, look at this European. And they would draw like a very anatomically normal European face and be like, look, their skulls are different, so it's totally fine because they're not the same race as us. We can subordinate and enslave and murder and make into garments and books all of these people.
Yep.
Because we decided that the European slaves they're not so good. They're a lower grade of slave. We want the primo slaves. We're gonna pay another $40 for that ounce.
That's right.
Of slave.
No, I love you using like it's a finite amount of like slaving. Like like I have $50. I need $50, and I want the prime they cut of slavery. Please, I want my full money's worth.
Yeah.
But absolutely, it's like you go from phrenology to, and the fucked up thing is that a lot of this stuff, this scientific inquiry, is that like it's very crude and it seems very backwards now, but it's like, unfortunately, this stuff was seen as the vanguard of the time because the people who had these are the people who had the most education. These are the people who had time to actually sit and just kind of fuck around and learn about these things and indulge in life and whatnot, and they didn't have to listen to any contrary opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were all enslaved. And which is so funny and ironic because so much of Europeans' collective knowledge and especially the Enlightenment, which they always sucking their dick over, comes from the knowledge gathered from Africa, from India, from China, from everywhere else in the world. You know what I'm saying? And initially they fucked up.
This is
why they had the Dark
Ages. All
Ages.
These lovely books that they translated and stole the math from.
Yeah. And the thing is that they even fucked it up, which is why they had I guess the Dark Ages was the plague, but they had there was another era, right, where they just had a really reactionary anti-intelligence movement, and they started like burning libraries and burning texts and stuff like.
Oh yeah, it's called the church. Well, there were definitely examples of that. Like the library at Alexandria during the Crusades was burned, and it was like the sum of all human knowledge at that time, I guess.
Yes.
It's like that was a very well-developed region, and they had a lot of like math and science figured out, and they had things that like we weren't doing, and they had much more advanced things like astronomy and maths.
Mm-hmm. They were even doing optometry doing the Islamic like scientific like Renaissance. When Islam had its scientific shit, they came up with like some optometry. I think they were like doing some good. I think they made advancements in like dental work. There were definitely some really good advancements, scientific and technological advancements that came from the world of Islam from one point.
Yeah.
And
it's just like at one point it just happened that all of the people that we were or I guess the French and the British and the Spanish and the Iberians and whoever the fuck else, the Dutch, etc., all those people that they were trying to control and oppress and everything, they just happened to not be white folks. They're like, hey, guess what? People who aren't white folks are bad. And then they started, creating all of this science and reinterpreting all of their art and their culture to justify and to reify this. Like there's a great example in like the Bible, and I'm not a religious fellow at all, but I think it's necessary to read, where there was an interpretation of the book of Genesis wherein when Adam and Eve, like the first people, like whatever. I don't want to get into that because I'll just go on a tangent and make fun of the Bible a lot. But essentially, that Cain, he kills his brother Abel and then gets the mark of Cain, and then like forever those people are bad. Okay, says God. So if you're these white imperialist Europeans who just happen to have slaves that are mostly not white right now, you're like, oh, these are the Canaanites, because we're doing the Bible shit right now. Yeah, these people are the ones that God said that we can fuck with and colonize, and it doesn't count because they're the descendants of Cain who killed Abel in the Bible. And like they reach out for all of these like convenient narratives, like, oh, like these Middle Easterners, like they're savages. Everyone who I don't like is a savage. It's like it's like how they approach it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to get back to the thing of like talking about whiteness in general, is that it goes from it went from something that once the European powers kind of realized, okay, we've kind of pushed the boundaries as much as we could, and we kind of have our own little nations right here. Now we need to expand. And that as you continue to expand and you get confronted with pushback from all these different groups, some of which are more developed than you or have greater, connections and advantages that you don't. Because a lot of people think that like, oh, white Europeans just went into Africa and just ransacked and just, put them on a boat and there was no resistance, and it's like, there was, first of all, there was already plenty of slave trading going on because that's something that just happens in every human society. So there was that trade established, but then also, because of the efforts made to work together, this common, under this common goal of just making money with feudalism having been done away with, and now capitalism is starting to replace it, and you get your money any way you can. Economic liberalism, basically, is what you have is that all the sharing of these resources and able to advance themselves to the way where they were able to effectively colonize the whole world. Britain and France, kind of becoming the at the forefront of this, even though Spain and like the Netherlands and Portugal kind of started it.
Yeah.
In any case,
at a certain point, like the reason that like this notion of whiteness develops the way it does in the United States is that these groups of Europeans that were not at the top of this hierarchy, which we were previously describing, like the people from Britain, seeing themselves at the top of it and maybe looking down at like from the like Czechoslovakia or from like Romania,
the Irish
farther east. Yes, the Irish. That's exactly what I'm getting to. That eventually the Irish were added to this group that was considered white because they weren't always. I mean, now Irish people are, I would say they're fully assimilated into whiteness, and they probably have been for a while, but in the United States it's been for longer than in Ireland, because Ireland is one. It might be the only country that's had like anti-imperial or anti-colonial struggle against like a white European power that's like actually itself a white country.
Yeah.
It's pretty weird. It's pretty weird. I mean, it's interesting. Like they've got theirs now, and they're slowly losing their radicalism and becoming like normal European bummers, but they were pretty fucking spicy for a long time, and they helped out some pretty cool people like Nelson Mandela and Muammar Gaddafi. Yep. They worked as forces to counter the reach of, I guess, British imperialism, especially because they're right next to Britain. They especially hated Britain. They didn't like the U.S. either, but like they really, really, really didn't like Britain.
Right. Yeah. Pick your battles and choose which enemy has the most priority.
Yeah. You had the Irish becoming white. You had the Italians becoming white. You had the Germans. The Germans becoming white. Yes, the Germans becoming white. They're in fact the largest ethnic group of white folks in the United States.
And what's so interesting is because I've met quite a few people of German descent, and they consistently have been like some of the most pleasant white people that I fucking met.
They're like, what Holocaust?
Dude, you know what? As much as we could shit on them for, like certain, figures letting that shit happen,
most of them didn't come over after the Holocaust. A lot of them were already here.
Oh, right, of course. And there was plenty of fascism, here already, just among
there was
Yankees.
and Nazism too.
But the thing that we got to give them credit for is that like the subsequent generations and whatnot have completely like accepted like, yeah, we fucked up. This is completely awful. We know what happened. I mean, they just barely paid off their debt some years ago. I forget how long ago, but they were still paying off their debt till fairly recently from the war.
I think 2005 for their reparations or something. Very recently. Oh okay. No, sorry, that was the UK paying off the slave reparations.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the Germany one was a little more recent, but in any case, it was like it's been after the 2000s, right? So it's been, almost a century and shit, over 80, 90 years. In any case, at least they took ownership of it, and they have, what I'm saying, they're one of the places that like take full ownership of the fact that we did this fucking really horrible, our ancestors did this really fucked up, horrible thing. We still have some of it present in our country, but we're going to push back on it, which is why you can't even go over there and jokingly, you can't even go in there and jokingly give a Sig Heil, or dress up like as a Hitler and whatnot. They don't even name their fucking kids that anymore. Adolf.
Yeah. They got that shit like a lot of it's literally against the wall. I mean the law. Against the wall. It's all against the wall.
That works too, though. It works. But
and that's what they do. That's what they do, right?
To the wall. Or actually, to the showers.
To the windows, to the wall. Put the Nazis up against the wall. And the sweat drips down my pile of dead Nazis. Oh, those bitches crawl.
To the sweat pours down all my Nazi scalps. Oh, you Nazi crawl. Oh, shit.
Anyway,
but to finish off on that about like, that's basically what happened is that in order to comprise a greater faction, because the thing is globally white people, Europeans, white people, pale people are the minority. So the only way they stand a chance is to find some way to, have some type of shared identity and shit. The same way that in the military you may have, different political ideological views, religious views, all this other shit. But on the front line, they're your brother in arms or sister in arms or whatever the fuck. You have one united purpose and shit. And it's like you have to do a lot of fucking massaging of people's minds and cultures and shit to do that. And one of the ways that you do that, and the Irish is a good example of this shit, is that the Irish and the Italians, they were able to, obviously the Italians were able to get themselves into fixtures of like the underworld and whatnot, and then use that.
They built their own parallel power structures because they were kept out of the power structures.
Right, exactly, yeah. And they weren't as black people. We tried to do that too, but then like total race riots and stuff.
COINTELPRO and shit.
COINTELPRO shit. Like they didn't give us a chance to establish dual power. But then they took that dirty money and they moved it into like working in sanitation and working in construction. I mean, this is a fairly common, like stereotype, but also, I mean, there's some level of truth to it. Especially when you get to like...
They put some money under their control to give themselves political power in the U.S.
Right, exactly. And then the other thing that happened with the Irish, so that was the Italians, the Irish became law enforcement.
Yeah.
So they became, they went from being one of the lower, and this is the way that a lot of them were able to become middle class, because law enforcement, especially when you get beyond just being a beat cop, gets to become a pretty cushy job. You know what I'm saying? Financially speaking, when you get to certain levels. So anyway, this was the ways in which different groups of disparate, conflicting, white people who usually hate each other were taught to see each other as being one and the same, because you give them opportunities to say, hey, we both come from struggle. We both, have not great education, we blah, 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 but at least we're not as bad as those, blacks and those Mexicans over there who always want to smoke weed and rape our women and play loud music into the, weird music into all hours of the night.
Yeah.
This is how it happens. This is how people cultivate identities at this level,
Yep. They're allowed into the club to keep someone else out.
Exactly, because otherwise it's really hard to get another human being to just exploit or even like act violently against a stranger, without there being some type of personal vendetta, but once again, this is kind of like, the whole thing with like propaganda and how people's minds get massaged, and then, acclimating people by giving them just enough, giving them more than table scraps, but not bringing them and giving them like the full 5-course meal. Yeah. But dangling it in front of them and saying, hey, if you just keep pushing harder and harder and harder, you'll be able to enjoy this feast like we are. One of the things I want to go back to that I mentioned earlier is talking about satire and parody, and why it takes a certain amount of emotional intelligence, but just also general intelligence about society and history and whatnot to actually pull it off and be effective.
Yeah. And why Trump is so fucking hard to satirize.
Yes, absolutely. We can absolutely use it. Yes, and how to avoid satirization or parody. So, real quick for those listening, and or whatever, just for just to put it out there, is that satire and parody are two distinct practices. Satire is a practice that's mainly aimed at criticizing or belittling or pointing out the flaws in a particular set of behavior or a group or ideology. It can be, but it is not obligated to be humorous. Whether you or not find the satire humorous is really just a reflection of your personal tastes, as opposed to the intent or the effectiveness of the piece itself, of the satire itself. Yep. Parody is the imitation of somebody's behavior, actions, or whatever the fuck, explicitly for the sake of mockery. It can be lighthearted mockery. It can be more heavy-handed, critical mockery, but it is always with the intent of laughter and through imitation of the source.
Yeah, and I would add one thing to this, which is Poe's law, which is it's one of these like internet discussion things. I don't know, it might be from something else, but it's essentially when you put something forward, if you're not sure of the audience, it can be interpreted as almost anything based on how the person sees you, the person posting it.
Yeah,
and this is one of these things that informs satire and parody, especially nowadays.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, because the thing is, really, what this is just and so Poe's law was written by Nathan Poe in 2005 on ChristianForums.com. He was actually
ChristianForums.com.
As I just Wikipedia this shit. So check this out. So this dude Nathan Poe, this post was made during a debate on creationism, where a previous poster had remarked to another user, "Good thing you included the winky, otherwise people might think you are serious." Poe then replied, "Without a winky smiling or other blatant display of humor, it is utterly impossible to parody a creationist in such a way that someone won't mistake for the genuine article." Or in other words, and they actually kind of break it down here, the original statement of Poe's law referred specifically to creationism, but it has since been generalized to apply to any kind of fundamentalism or extremism. Basically, what they're saying is that if you don't tag your parody by saying that this is parody or making it so abundantly clear, there will be people who take the shit at face value.
Yeah. And maybe even if you do.
And even if you do, they could still do that. And a good example of this, actually, and really what this is it's actually kind of just an update on an old concept called the death of the author, which is basically just like, how do you separate the art and the artist? Is that like an artist or whatever creates something and they have an intent and they have a message and they have a certain level of or aesthetics or way that they communicate shit, right? But you cannot control what your audience interprets of that shit, because your audience isn't going to be operating with the same level of understanding as you are.
Yeah.
And so this is basically just an updated version of that same idea, that you cannot rely on the consumers of your shit to come away with the same conclusion you did, even if you make it abundantly clear what your intent was. Yeah. Because now people are so skeptical that they can even be like, oh, well, maybe they're just saying this out loud to cover their own ass, or maybe they're just saying it because they want us to think the opposite, contrarianism, and whatnot. And actually, as a matter of fact, a good example of this shit is SouthPark. Yeah. Because SouthPark, and I'm somebody who's never been, super crazy about SouthPark. I admittedly only really started watching it like when they kind of made their turn after I think right before the election or whatever. Basically, when they started becoming, when they kind of grew up a little bit and started introduce like woke PC principle and shit like that, and started criticizing
it's like we're gonna miss the mark in a different way.
Which the thing is that like to me that was to me that was the time when they missed the mark the least.
Yes.
In their whole careers. But in any case, the reason why I bring up South Park is because they're the ones who are popular, well known for getting away with this. Oh, it's just satire. We like to make fun of both sides, or we just, it should be understood that we're just, parodying these motherfuckers and whatnot.
Yeah.
But then it's like we also hear your views. We also hear you express your actual views, which they identify as right-wing libertarians. And it's like, okay, you would have had a better ability to downplay that shit if you hadn't admitted your political views out loud. Because with that context, when I go back and I listen to your man bear is it man bear pig? Yeah, man bear pig.
The global warming thing.
The global warming, which was basically they were climate change deniers, which is essentially what that episode boiled down to. And they only came to apologize and apologize to Al Gore about that shit like almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
The thing is, I actually really liked that episode because there was sort of a critique of, like, no, it's like what you had said earlier about someone critiquing something that wasn't like what they were trying to critique.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it critiques Al Gore centering himself in the environmental movement and being the face of it. But at the same time, it's also this, there's this very infantile global warming's not real, man, kind of like feeling to the episode. So it's like that's something that I've come to appreciate more and more is unintentional satires.
Yeah, because like it seems like we kind of because in many respects it feels like we kind of tapped the well on intentional satire. Yeah. Just because of how polarized things have gotten. But the thing is about that thing is so like I agree with you that there were some good sticking points about like criticizing the blatant egoism and centering of Al Gore, of him centering himself. But the thing is that, like, once again, like you said, it's like you don't have to then you don't have to actually dismiss. It's dismissing the greater claim because of the person. And there's a name for this fallacy. I don't know what it's called.
Ad hominem?
Is that what it is? That you
dismiss the man.
At the man, where like I guess you're criticizing the person as opposed to you're using criticism of an individual to dismiss their ideas.
Yeah.
Where because the idea of climate change obviously is clear as day if it wasn't then. And you can also say that, climate change is real and that Al Gore was kind of being a fucking ham and trying to center himself in this movement.
Yeah.
It's like you can do both things, but for some reason they chose to just dig into the ad hominem. And then, their excuse at the end of the day was, oh, it's just satire, it's just parody and shit. But it's just like, y'all also played a role in helping to legitimize that approach to these issues.
And you have done it so many times on so many issues in the exact same fashion.
Right.
And that's why it's not what you're saying it is. That's like South Park undermines themselves with those claims. And then they go totally limp dick on Trump, which is fucking sad because he's the goofiest motherfucker in the world. Just people can't find an angle on him to make fun of him because they have to go to very dark places to do it. I mean, it's really funny when you find it, but,
I mean, the thing is, I don't feel like, obviously for us it's not too hard, but we don't have as much vested interest with the system as is. We're not as invested with this shit, maintaining it. Whereas Matt and Trey, hell, they just sold the fucking show for over $100 million, and each of those guys are already worth like almost half $500 million.
Jesus.
Yeah,
it's just like they're, I don't know. Like I've never particularly loved their show, and the things that I've loved about it have never been the things that they were trying to make the audience love about it.
Dude, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So like to get back into and this kind of goes back to once again because even though Matt and Trey they're more right-wing libertarians, so that's why they're able to make valid critiques of the left and the right, liberals and Republicans, or lefties and right-wingers. But once again, it's kind of this enlightened centrism take where you just kind of default to saying both sides are wrong to some degree. So I'm just going to sit here and mock both sides and pretend that that's actually a final way to actually deal with issues. And it's like, no, we can say that one side is more wrong than the other because one side has the objective here and is acting in more good faith than not, and is using a certain set of information to determine which way to move.